Where do the New York Islanders fit in as far as their prospect pool is concerned? The hosts of Locked On NHL Prospects give you their rankings and break down the top prospects in the Islanders organization. We have our reaction and a lot more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also now hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On Islanders. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We have got a very busy show coming up a little bit later. We will be joined by the two co-hosts of Locked On NHL Prospects as they have ranked all 32 teams in the NHL with their prospect pools, and I'm sure it'll be great to hear what they have to say, and then we'll have our reaction to it. We're also going to discuss where the Islanders ranked in a recent poll on The Athletic at their use of the cap efficiency with their contracts. But first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, feel free to send us an email. The email address, lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name, where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on Twitter at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all the latest Islanders news, notes, and happenings throughout the offseason. Trade rumors, free agency, hirings, firings, if they ever do make a move on some of these assistant coaches. Whatever's happening to the Islanders, we'll have it for you here on Locked On Islanders. So to get started today, we are going to examine a recent ranking by The Athletic of all 32 teams' cap efficiency. How well do they use the available cap space? And essentially what they did was rank every contract based on, the likelihood that they live up to it, the value that each player brings, and the difference. And essentially, the Islanders, no surprise, did not do very well. Now, a year ago, the Islanders were 25th in the league. This year, they dropped a couple of spaces down to 27th. And I think the frustrating thing when you look at this deal and you look at the rankings, the players who have the best value contracts, with one exception, all tend to be fringe players. And some of your best players are not living up to the money that they are being paid according to the analytics of this chart. So no Islanders forward, for example, got higher than a B on their contract grade. And the three players had a B. Everyone else was a C plus, a C minus, or a D plus. The three Bs, two of them didn't play the whole season. Oliver Wahlstrom, Hudson Fasching, and then Brock Nelson was the third. And Nelson, who led the team in goals, led the team in points, certainly at least living up to his contract and then some. Fasching, was making the league minimum or very close to it. Wahlstrom, about the same as Fasching. Again, not hard contracts to live up to and to exceed expectations on. You go out there and, score 12, 14 goals and 30 points. You've more or less lived up to an $800,000 a year contract. And then the next three players who all got C plus grades, all bottom six, or two of them, bottom six guys. Carson Kuhlman, Julian Gauthier, and then I guess Pierre Engvall was a second-line guy at the end of the year. But everyone else, then you start getting into lower, C and C- territory. And the lowest 5 contracts on the Islanders, grade-wise, Anders Lee, who's making $7 million a year, J.G. Pageau, Matthew Barzal, Casey Cizikas, and then Bo Horvat. Now, obviously, Horvat has to produce more like he did in Vancouver than he did with the Islanders in order to fix that problem. But other than that, you see this team just not looking exceptionally good as far as their efficiency is concerned. Now, defensively, it's better. Noah Dobson had the highest grade. He was an A- grade. And that's more based on his offense because his defense, as we all know, every day, as you know, we've been talking about his shaky play in his own zone for quite some time. But at least offensively, putting up the 50 points gets him on what was a $4 million deal. That gets you nice return for value on paper. But again, Sebastian Aho was the next best value. And he also had struggles in his own zone. So the lowest 3, Romanov, Mayfield, and Polak. But overall, the Islanders with a 42% efficiency rating. The only teams below them on this chart, the Sharks, the Blues, the Blue Jackets, the Ducks, and the Blackhawks. And I hate to say it, but going forward, we know some of those teams like, the Blackhawks and the Ducks, a lot of young talent. It's not going to take as much productivity from some of those players on those rosters to get those grades up. And I guess the concern, and every day, as you know, we talked about this yesterday on the show, is the long term, because so many Islanders players, especially in the forward group, are on the wrong side of 30. The entire identity line, Palmieri, Pageau, Parise, if he comes back, all these guys are past 30. Brock Nelson, Anders Lee. These are your big scorers. These are your top 6 guys. And look, you could say what you want. It may not happen this year, but Father Time remains undefeated. And eventually, the players, when they get to be 34, 35, 36, they start to slow down. The contracts stay the same. The cap hit stays the same until they come off the books. And yet, the productivity is likely to be reduced. And it's frustrating, to say the least. It's very frustrating to see this sort of laid out this way, and just to hope against hope that the Islanders end up doing better in the future with this cap rating than they did. And if you're wondering, with the Islanders down at 27, the Capitals 25th, the Flyers 24th, the Penguins 22nd. Now this ranking was done just before the Carlson trade, so that will probably change that ranking. But, looking at the other teams in the Metropolitan Division, a lot of them kind of struggling as well with some of these ratings. The Rangers were higher. They were at 11. And, then you have the Devils at 5, which is pretty impressive. And at number 2, the Carolina Hurricanes. Number 1, the Florida Panthers, with the most efficient use of their cap space. And look, a lot of people, even Lou Lamoriello himself, you ask him about all these contracts. Yeah, we signed them for too much and for too long. You do that with free agents. There's no way around it. But hearing your own GM say that doesn't really fill you with confidence that he even believes necessarily that he's handling the cap as efficiently as he possibly can. All right, when we come back, the two hosts of Locked On NHL Prospects will break down the Islanders prospect pool, talk about some of the players, how far away they are, and where the Islanders prospect pool ranks among the 32 teams. We've got that, plus my reaction to this and our Islanders birthday of the day, a popular goalie who was with the team for just one season about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, but made his mark in the broadcast booth after he retired. We've got all that and more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you pick a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team and bet on them to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. And you can use those bonus bets on things like point spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Giant fans, can they get back to the playoffs for the second year in a row? And can the Jets with Aaron Rodgers break one of the longest playoff droughts in the NFL today? Right now, anytime the team you bet on wins a game in the regular season, you will get bonus bets. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Check it out today.
So let's start with, in both our minds, the worst team in the league in terms of prospect pools. I've often called their prospect pool more of a puddle. It's the New York Islanders. Lou Lamoriello hasn't retained a first-round pick since 2019. That's the last time the Islanders picked in the first round, and it's starting to show. I like William Dufour. I like Matthew Maggio. I especially like Calle Odelius. I especially like Isaiah George. But
love those players.
But are they kind of high-end caliber? And is there any way that the Islanders can work their way forward without a first-round pick? I mean, if they trade their 2024 first-round pick, I think they're just going to stay at this bottom of the ranking for the rest of time. I mean, it's just rough right now for the Isles, right?
Yeah, it's a bit painful because they are kind of that one massive exception in terms of this is not a high-end contending team just yet, and the fact that their prospect pool has some interesting depth pieces that in good prospect pools should not crack top 5 rankings for prospects in a pool. Yeah, it's a little bit concerning. Like, again, Calle Odelius, I think, had a bit of an off year. But this is an intelligent, mobile, puck-moving defenseman. He's quite well-rounded. He needs to kind of step up a couple gears again this season to get back to his trajectory from his draft year season. And Isaiah George is one of my favorite players to watch in the OHL. Incredibly physical, tremendous skater, really intelligent, offensively gifted in ways that he hasn't really been able to show fully just yet. I'm hoping to see more of that this year, because if it's not starting to show now, I'll be starting to get a little bit more concerned on the offensive projection. But yeah, like William Dufour was a decent player. And then a couple of guys have gotten like some NHL looks already, like Simon Holmstrom, who's okay. This year's picks, 2023 draft class, Danny Nelson is a very straightforward fourth line center projection. And I don't see too much beyond that. Which was a strange way of using their highest draft pick this year, considering that this is a pool that only has a couple depth pieces and no one that could move the needle at all, in my view. That spending their highest draft pick this year on a player who I really cannot see cracking a top 9 on an NHL contending team, that isn't ideal from my perspective, but definitely some interesting names.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's the type of thing where they need to start collecting more picks just to change the mindset of the draft itself, because they're making safe picks every year because they don't have a first rounder and they're just trying to hit on wherever they can find them. But when you have more picks, you can take more risks, and I think that'll change the mindset in New York drastically in terms of who they pick, and that'll improve the prospect pool. My kind of read on a guy like Isaiah George is really just, I mean, everything you mentioned is spot on in terms of the untapped offensive skill, the physicality, but for me, it's especially the stick work with him that'll make him stand out at the next level. He's just a fantastic disruptor of plays, loves to get his stick in lanes and get involved defensively, and he's really good at reading breakouts and finding little lanes to use in order to break out the puck with efficiency and not just kind of dumping it out the first chance he gets. He's pretty raw, but he'll, with enough development, I feel like he can get something really good out of George. For Odelius, for me, it's Calle Odelius is just a straight up offensive rush player. I love the way that he gets involved in offensive rushes. I love the way that he carries the puck out of the offensive zone. I just have a lot of trouble with his defensive projectability, especially with the views I've gotten in this year with Djurgårdens in the Allsvenskan. At a lower competition level, he was having more trouble, surprisingly, with rush defending, which was very surprising to me. And then you look at a guy like William Dufour, who's a really good offensive mover, really good kind of spacing type of player in the offensive zone, loves to find those little pockets of space and exploit them. He's got a great shot, but mainly what'll make him work at the next level is how efficiently he's going to be able to find that offensive space. And I feel like he's going to get a great chance of that in the AHL. And he'll be able to work his game up to the NHL level. I'd be very surprised if you get anything more than a third liner out of William Dufour, but at the end of the day, you're getting a really solid one who's going to be able to contribute offensively. Reminds me a bit of Anthony Beauvillier in some areas, minus the playmaking and plus the goal scoring ability. I feel like he's got 20-25 goal potential, but I'd be very surprised if he puts up more than 20 assists at the NHL level. Another guy I want to shout out is Matthew Maggio. I've been really impressed with his tape in the OHL this year. Really, really impressed with his effort level, his intensity, his leadership skills. He's been involved in all three zones regularly, but he's also got the finesse and the offensive sort of intelligence to find space and get that shot off. Kind of a similar profile to Dufour, but for me, he seems a bit more projectable, mainly because of the effort level in all three zones, his ability to read defensive plays and get involved. I mean, yes, he was 20 years old last year in the OHL, but he truly, truly dominated to a point where I don't think it's just a matter of the age. I think he's developed his game in enough ways that he's been very impressive to me. So those are two guys that I think are depth pieces for the Isles, but and same for Odelius, same for Isaiah George. There's nothing that projects as anything, top end. I don't see any top six talent now that they've traded out to Ratu out of the Islanders for Bo Horvat, and especially with the fact that they haven't picked in the first round, like I said, in the last 4 years, it's very rough in terms of how it's looking in the prospect pool for the Islanders.
One last name I'll throw out there before we go to break is Jakub Skarek, the goalie. I think he's a genuinely okay goalie prospect, and I think he's around the same tier of player as the other ones that we've outlined here. So they do at least have one player for forward, defenseman, and goalie, which we can't say for all the teams we're going to be looking at in the next couple episodes. But yeah, it's kind of slim pickings here.
All right, so thank you to Hadi, Kalakeche, and Sebastian for giving us that analysis. Look, it isn't pretty. There's no way around that. We're going to have our reaction to this analysis of the Islanders prospect pool, ranked dead last out of 32 teams in the NHL, according to our experts here at Locked On NHL Prospects. We'll have that, plus our Islanders birthday of the day, coming up next on the Locked On Islanders podcast. So, again, it's difficult, really, to watch that and feel overly optimistic. I like the fact that there was some appreciation for Calle Odelius, for Maggio, for Dufour, and even Jakub Skarek, who I kind of have questioned at different times because of the fact that he hasn't really blossomed at Bridgeport over the last couple of years, at least statistically, and with regard to a lack of consistency, really, as far as him getting it done on a day-to-day basis. But they still do seem to have some hope. But here's the bottom line message that I think we take away from Sebastian and Hadi's analysis, and that is that there are no players right now in this system who are really considered impact players, as in nobody who's going to be a top 6 forward or a top pair defenseman. And, okay, maybe, Maggio, 20 years old, maybe he's a year away. Maybe Dufour is a year or two away. But at best, he's a third or fourth line projection. And that doesn't create difference makers. And the problem organizationally is when Anders Lee, who's 33, when Brock Nelson, who's over 30, and J.G. Pajot, and Martin, Cizikas, Clutterbuck, obviously Zach Parise may retire now, we don't know, but when all of these 30-plus-year-old players hang up their skates or start to decline, unless you start making trades to add draft picks, there's nobody there to take their place. And look, the Islanders in recent years have been somewhere between 7th and 10th in the conference, trying to nail down one of those final 2 playoff spots in the Eastern Conference. And when you are making trades and trading away prospects like Aatu Räty and your first round pick traded away 4 years in a row to win now, and winning and winning now makes you a fringe playoff team or barely a playoff team, that has to be a concern, because when these guys get older, there has to be a plan in place. So, Odelius, according to Sebastian and Hadi, you're looking at a guy who may be able to take the place of a Scott Mayfield down the line, and be a solid, 4th, 5th, 6th defenseman on your roster, or Isaiah George. Dufour could eventually maybe replace what Zach Parise did this year, or maybe what Oliver Wahlstrom has done so far, at least a year or two down the road. But who's going to replace the Brock Nelsons and the Anders Lees and the Kyle Palmieris when these guys become 34, 35, 36 and start to slow down? And what it really says is that Lou Lamoriello has to start taking a slightly different approach, in that if he doesn't start acquiring some picks, if he doesn't start holding on to some picks and some prospects, and maybe even adding some if we get to the trade deadline and a guy like Cal Clutterbuck might be available to be dealt to a team that needs an experienced leader, maybe you trade him even if the Islanders might make the playoffs, in order to start getting some extra picks or mid-level prospects to refill the prospect pool. So to me, this approach that Lou Lamoriello has taken, it has its downside. We know this team is older and slower and needs a little injection of speed and skill and youth. Everydayers, you've heard me say that. But it's not too late to be able to tweak the formula a little bit and avoid the ultimate, we're going to be terrible for 3 or 4 years and have to rebuild from scratch and just be what the Anaheim Ducks or San Jose Sharks or Chicago Blackhawks have been in the last 2 or 3 years, where, before the season starts that this team is just not going to have a good year and isn't going anywhere. We don't want to see that, and it'll be up to Lou Lamoriello. Look, I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked that right now the Islanders ranked, Sebastian and Hadi ranked the Islanders 32nd. Maybe I would have gone 30th or 31st, but we knew they were pretty close to the bottom in the prospect rankings. I mean, every other ranking I've seen has ranked them 27th, 29th, and the 27th ranking was before they traded away Aatu Räty. But at the same time, you know, there are ways to avoid the bottom falling out in a year or two. And it's going to be up to Lou Lamoriello to do it. The question is, will he? And I just wish I was more confident in that fact. All right. Thanks again to Sebastian and Hadi for all their great work and their analysis. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. I'm a couple of days late with this one, but Tuesday was the 46th birthday of former Islanders goalie Martin Biron. Biron, originally drafted in the first round by Buffalo back in 1995, made his NHL debut with the Sabres in 95-96, but didn't become a full-time NHLer until 1999-2000. Later played for the Flyers, and then joined the Islanders for the 2009-2010 season. Played 29 games with the Isles, a .327 goals against average, a 9-14-4 record, and an .896 save percentage on a team that really was struggling that year. Then finished his career with 4 seasons with the New York Rangers. His best game as an Islander, pretty easy to pinpoint. Halloween night, 2009, at the old barn. Biron's former team, the Buffalo Sabres, in town, and Martin Biron leads the Islanders to a 5-0 shutout win. 38 saves for Biron to earn the win. Islanders outshot 38-30. Ryan Miller started in goal for Buffalo, was relieved by Patrick Lalime in this one. A hat trick for Jeff Tambellini in this game, and the only shutout for Martin Biron. Biron, one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. Always loved talking to him in the press box and after games. And he went on to become a broadcaster and does quite well with it. So Marty Biron is our Islanders birthday of the day. Want to thank everyone again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Everydayers, Monday on the show, we'll start talking a little bit more about some of these prospects who may get a look at camp, and what they have to do individually. We'll do one a day to start, to have a chance to break into this lineup and what their skill set is and what they can bring to the table. So make sure you join us for that. Until then, have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.